Hello, my name is SB Wolf, and this is an 80% speedrun of Donkey Kong Country 2 in 38 minutes and 14 seconds. This is a run I'm really proud of. I spent close to a year running this game and category very actively, and I'm really happy with the end result. This run aims to beat the game as fast as possible with no real restrictions. Time starts as soon as one player mode is selected. So for the first 2 words of the run, the developers actually placed hidden warp arrows that can be used as shortcuts to the end of the level. These are obviously a much faster way to complete the level, so for the first stage I get Dixie Kong, then team throw into the warp hidden on top of the screen, which gets me straight to the end. But for the next level, the warp arrow is used in a much more creative way. Instead of taking the warp straight away, which is just below the starting area, I head up and take a beetle. Then I fall down, face away from another beetle, throw the beetle within a 6-frame window and attempt to regrab it. This creates an invisible object which can be thrown in a specific spot and spawn the warp arrow at Diddy's current spot, which ends the level immediately. That right there is the first wrong warp of the run. By clashing the 2 beetles with each other, the beetle Diddy was holding got killed, but the game still thinks he's holding an object. This results in the current held item slot being empty, thus allowing other objects to be loaded in that memory location, including things that are not normally supposed to be picked up, such as warp arrows. By throwing a warp arrow, bonus barrel, or cannon while facing left, it triggers a function that sends the player to the warp net and allows them to continue to the next level. This wrong warp technique will be used fairly frequently throughout the run. This method of getting into the warp early is actually fairly precise. That is because if the Kongs roll against a wall, they lose the ability to move left or right in midair unless they jump, so I have to make sure Dixie doesn't bump into them at any point or else she won't have enough speed to get into the warp arrow. This is another wrong warp. It makes use of the true right-click double jump, which is done by pressing A and B on a 3-frame window before starting to ride the snake. If done correctly, this allows for a mid-air double jump, which brings me up to a couple of conveniently placed beetles that can be used for the wrong warp. Here's Crow. This is one of the only 3 stages in the run that have time-affecting RNG in them, and it's the most influential one by far. The first phase is pretty straightforward, but in the second phase, Crow starts to bash against the nest and drop eggs, which can randomly be fake and not be grabbable. It's more or less a coin flip of this happening on each of the 2 eggs that are needed to finish the fight, and each fake egg loses 2 or 3 seconds depending on when it drops. Luckily, in this run, this fight was fakeless, which gave me a pretty solid start. The first level of Warp 2 is host to another wrong warp. This one arguably is the easiest to pull off in the entire run, as getting the invisible object does not require any tight timing. But right before getting into the glitched warp arrow, which in this case does not spawn on top of Diddy, there's a deceptively hard trick called the 2-1 jump. By pressing A exactly 2 frames after pressing B, then pressing B again to jump on a 2-frame window, it's possible to get on top of the entrance grotto in a single jump and skip a team throw. This saves close to 2 seconds. This level has a pretty cool trick called the Big Boy. By throwing Dixie onto an enemy, then jumping as she returns to Diddy, it's possible to get some sort of extra mid-air jump, which allows for the warp to be accessed more quickly. The target is then hit with a gold swap, which was also used in the 3rd level of World 1. Just as the Kongs are coming out of the warp, they temporarily possess a so-called airborne state, which has the property of registering a character swap next to a target as a hit, allowing for the stage to be ended a little bit more quickly while also allowing the Kongs to be switched without a 1-second long animation. Dixie is used for this level because at the end of the stage there is an unavoidable fanfare after taking the warp. In such a case, Dixie is preferred because her guitar solo is considerably shorter than Diddy's rap. This is one of the hardest levels in Warp 2 to do optimally. The jump right at the start is fairly precise to clear without losing any speed, and optimally throwing into the warp is also fairly difficult. Not much else to this level though. This, on the other hand, is the easiest level in Warp 2, if not in the entire run. The warp arrow is right at the beginning, and I just do a gold swap at the end to prepare Dixie for the upcoming boss fight. Cleaver's fight is the second stage in the run with time-affecting RNG in it. After its attacks, cannonballs drop from above that have to be picked up and used to hit it with, and these can spawn anywhere on the ledge. On the first hit, I got a pretty slow spawn that made me go a little far out of my way to pick it up. The second spawn was also pretty far to the right, losing a little bit more time. And this third one was a little suboptimal as well. This is the lava fly. Normally you're supposed to wait for Cleaver's attack on the left, after which hooks would spawn that allow you to get to the other side, grab the cannonball and hit it with it. But with a good hover from the top, it's possible to barely reach the other side of the screen and get access to the cannonball early. Now, it's still necessary to bait out Cleaver's attack before actually hitting it, otherwise the hooks don't spawn and the fight essentially gets soft-locked. After that, I just wait for the 2 other cannonballs to spawn and use them to finish the fight. Warp 3 is in a way where the run truly begins, as there's no more warp barrels being used to get straight to the end. This is Barrel Bayou. I immediately swap to Diddy because his movement speed is higher than Dixie's. I enter this barrel and shoot out of it, which saves a few frames, then I make sure to not grab this DK barrel by releasing white for a few frames, shoot out of one more barrel, and start riding ramp. I attempted a very precise jump to get on the top barrel early, but went just a hair too soon and barely missed the B I needed to bounce on, so I had to back it up with a mid-air double jump and enter the bottom barrel. A double jump with Rambi is done by repressing B in mid-air after a charge, then flicking the D-pad back and forth. This cost about 0.8 seconds. I dismount off of Rambi right before the signpost to save animation frames. This team throw is actually slower in the short term, but is done to set up this one fly coming up. Every time an upwards team throw is executed, super jump status gets stored, which means that the next time damage is taken, if the B button is held, it results in a much higher jump which allows Dixie to just hover this entire swamp. A small ending section and the stage is over. Glimmer's Galleon is a long water level. It is actually one of the hardest levels to perform optimally in the run. It is possible to save a deceptively high amount of time on every corner by just cutting them a little bit tighter. I bunked on a couple corners throughout this level, losing me about a second. I played the first half of the level as solo Dixie, as having only one Kong saves some lag frames. There's actually a lot of liberty in how corners can be approached. 2 different runners will often play the level in a slightly different, more personalized way. This section right here is the main reason to play this stage as a single Kong. If Diddy was trailing behind, there will be considerably more lag. Every time Glimmer turns around, he briefly flashes the screen with a white light. This effect was removed in all Virtual Console re-releases, presumably for epilepsy concerns. I'll end with a gold swap to line up Diddy for the next level. This is Crockett Climber. The first half of the level is played as normal, with a couple dangerous maneuvers, most notable being the box roll, where a roll is initiated at the edge of a platform next to a grabbable box. But towards the checkpoint area, a wrong warp is performed, this time without the aid of invisible objects. I team up and wait for this Cutlass to notice me. Then I turn back, throw Dixie into its hitbox, moonwalk into the barrel to keep the Cutlass loaded, and get ejected from the stage. The reason this works is because when they go into a certain part of their animation, Cutlasses are erroneously programmed to change a button memory related to the player's state, rather than to the Cutlasses. This makes it so that when exiting a barrel while holding left or right on the D-pad, the wrong warp process is initiated. Anyway, this next level is Rattle Battle, where Rattly the Snake takes the starring role. The stage is pretty infamous for its weird hitboxes, so much so that it spawned a game among speedrunners. Someone posts a picture of the snake and an enemy approaching each other, and others have to guess in which parties favored the interaction went. Oftentimes, the right answer is the opposite of the intuitive one. There's not that many spots that see optimizations in this level, since most of these jumps are buffered. But notably, in certain spots, a skid off a ledge is used, since it allows for the gain of extra horizontal distance before initiating a jump. In such cases, the skid can have variable speed, and it's the main factor that influences how fast this level goes by. This jump between all the kabooings is particularly precise. A gold swap is used here at the end to set up Dixie for the level coming up. Slime Climb features another wrong warp, but first I go into the water and swap Kongs near the surface. This sets up a variant of the super jump that goes really high. I was trying to take damage from those beetles from the bottom, but I slightly messed up my rope climb, so I had to take it a little bit slower. As soon as I get up to the checkpoint area, I clash the beetles with each other, get an invisible object, and use it on the bonus payroll further below to end the stage. This is Bramble Blast, where the objective is to navigate through a maze of barrels to the end. Attempt to shoot out of some of these barrels from the direction they're facing by default, which on most of them is a 3-frame window and is called a quick shot. This damage boost skips a bunch of barrels, including very conveniently 2 quick shots. There's an alternate route through this level which saves the damage boost for this section and makes it possible to shoot through the bee in the center. This route is nearly identical to the one I used in terms of speed, but it's a little bit harder because of having to perform the 2 quick shots further back in the level. Coming up is the vine clip. By using a big boy off a clampon, it's possible to clip through a vine and skip a pretty big section. At the end, I go swap to set up Dixie. This boss is honestly just a waiting game. He attacks a few times, spawns a TNT barrel, and he has to get attacked with said TNT barrel. Rinse and repeat. I go for quick hits, which are done by using Dixie to grab the barrels, then using the back overthrow animation to hit the boss. This allows for consistent visual cues to be used to know when to start walking away to dodge the falling boss. I look at Dixie's breathing and count 6 full breaths for the first hit. The fight goes on with similar dynamics for about a minute and a half. Haven't fast forwarded through this yet? Well, I hope you're enjoying this hot action happening right now. World 4 is one of the hardest segments of the run. It opens up with Hornet Hole, where I immediately swap to Diddy, which is a bit of a more dangerous route that saves about a third of a second. The most difficult thing about this stage is the honey climbing. Each jump off a wall is done by holding the direction opposite to the wall, then pressing the jump up. Optimally, I will then start holding the direction towards the wall again to regrab it as quickly as possible. This is all pretty hard to do at full speed. I had a few minor mistakes throughout this level, but it was otherwise pretty solid. I take a small detour to collect Squitter the spider. He will be used as part of the setup for the so-called Scrolly Scroll. By forming a web right under a hook, then dismounting off of Squitter and jumping off the hook once, the game forces Diddy back on the spider, and for some reason it makes the camera scroll incredibly fast, pushing the Kongs with it. It's then necessary to take damage to unlock the camera again, which I do right at the end of this horizontal section. This glitch doesn't actually save as much time as it seems, only about 1 or 2 seconds, but it's still a time save nonetheless. I make my way to the end of the stage and go swap on the target to get to play as Diddy for the next stage. Target Terror is an auto-scroller. Enough said. Actually, there are 2 optimizations throughout the stage. Jumping off these carts as soon as possible can save a few frames. In addition, there are 2 spots in this level where I'm supposed to bounce on flitters to get to the next cart, but it's possible to skip 1 bounce on each of the 2 spots, saving some frames yet again. Aside from that, this stage literally plays itself. this is the first flater skip. And this is the second flater skip. This car jump is a little bit different from the others two, as the optimal frame to jump from it is pretty late as opposed to as early as possible. Bramble Scramble is just one of the most difficult wrong warps in the run. Small micro-movement differences can affect whether objects spawn in the correct order needed for it to work. I climb this rope as quickly as I can and stun this beetle after jumping up. After that, I jump into the bramble on the left and let Dixie touch the exclamation barrel up on top. I then clash the beetle on a tiny slope, which gives me an invisible object, and I make my way to the right way. When I get to the Squawks crate, I jump and throw left, which brings the bonus barrel to Dixie and ends the stage. It's worth noting that normally having invisibility status will kill the beetle when attempting to touch it, but the iframes from the previous damage boost allow me to grab it instead and use it to wrong warp. This next stage, Rickety Race, is a little bit of a breather. I'll go backwards at first and activate the boost barrel, which speeds up the rest of the level by a considerable amount. It's possible to save a few frames by jumping in specific spots, but that's about it for optimizations here. I swap to Diddy in preparation for the next stage. It's not possible to gold swap on this target. Mudhole Marsh is one of the most difficult levels in the run. I start the level with a tight roll off the first platform that requires precise timing of both the release and the press of the Y button. Some rolls through a few enemies allow for some pretty good speed to be built up. For this roll, Y has to be released before hitting the second beetle. Here I have to wait for this beam. The Eagle Pit is one of the more dangerous parts of the level. Timings on all actions here are very precise. Coming into the second Eagle Pit, I have to bounce off the last eagle as far right as possible so that I can perform a moonwalk on landing to push the camera to the left. This delays the spawn of the Cat o' Nine Tails coming up, which makes it possible to roll through them. I grab the cannonball to help set up a wrong warp coming up. I throw the cannonball on the first beetle, delay the spawn of the last beetle, then grab it and clash it with the remaining one. I scroll the camera back and forth to manipulate the cannon spawn, throw the invisible object, and take the cannonball to enter the cannon and end the stage. With that stage out of the way, I enter the final non-boss level of World 4 in Ramby Rumble. The first section is pretty tough, as there's Sonic climbing in the way and there's a major skip in the form of a super jump. I get close to a clampon and team throw upwards, which makes it so that after taking damage, Dixie flies into the hook up on the left, which gets me to this upper section much sooner. This last jump off the honey wall is to spawn the D early, so that when I enter the barrel, I can shoot out of it at the correct angle. I got momentarily stuck on the honey here, which forced me to jump over the cutlass a bit differently and lose a bit of time. The second part of the level is played as Ramby the Rhino. This section is pretty fast and cool looking, as it's done at charge speed for most of the way through. There's also a trick called the Death Jump, which consists of running under a platform close to the Death Barrier and double jumping right before touching it, which if done right puts Ramby just past the Death Barrier and allows him to survive. This saves just about half a second. A double jump here at the end saves a bit of time. This is King's Instinct, the boss of World 4. He is fought as Quax the Parrot, and to hit him, X have to be thrown at a small red sting on its back. This fight is pretty simple when on script, but if something falls just out of line, the boss will go all over the screen and it becomes very hard to recover due to how specific the spot where he has to be hit is. At the start of phase 2, there's a frame perfect and pixel specific Actos to hit the boss early and turn the phase into essentially a 2 cycle. I didn't get it here and it costs about half a second to attempt, but it saves 2 seconds if achieved. If done correctly, he will be flashing like after getting hit while the bees form around him. Word 5 kicks off with Gusty Glade. I play just the opening with Dixie and get hit on purpose off a Spiny. This accomplishes 2 things. It allows me to play as Diddy, who as I've already established moves faster, and allows me to play as a single Kong as opposed to 2, which reduces lag and speeds up an animation in the next stage, which I'll talk about later. This is one of my favorite levels in the run. It's just a straightforward left to right stage and a lot of the movements look really nice. It's also fairly dangerous as a lot of sections require a decent amount of precision and the entire level is split as one Kong, meaning one hit means death. This way of hitting the target at the end saves a few frames compared to jumping on it. Dropping straight on it from the rope will trigger the long rap fanfare, so that's not an option. As soon as Diddy gets on the cart here at the beginning, if Dixie was trailing behind him, it will take more time for it to get moving. This is the main reason why taking an intentional hit is faster than swapping characters at the start of Gusty Glade, which will leave Dixie present here. Anyway, this is Haunted Hall. Jumping in specific spots helps save some frames here and there. Generally speaking, jumping down big downhill sections and all uphill sections, however small, results in a faster time. These plus and minus barrels affect the timer on the top, but as long as it doesn't reach 0 before I hit the door, it doesn't matter at all. There's not much else to say about this level, so I would take some time to talk about the next one for a moment. Gusty Glade is supposed to by far the most difficult wrong warp in the entire run. So much so that for the longest time, it was thought nearly impossible to pull off for a human player without too many slowdowns. But in March of 2020, I gave this wrong warp a try, and with the help of other individuals, a route was developed that would save about 5 seconds over a normal run of the stage. It took a bit of time and courage for me to start attempting it in runs, as about 4 attempts of the wrong warp out of 5 would just fail and result in either death or a huge time loss. And needless to say, when I did finally implement this into my runs, most of them will get to the stage and usually just fail the trick and die. I actually ended up temporarily dropping this wrong warp on 2 separate occasions for the sake of getting a quicker personal best time. When trying to beat my last few personal bests before this one, I went a few months worth of active attempts without a new PB on more than one occasion because of this trick. But in the end, I finally managed to complete a good run with the trick in it. As such, I proudly present Gusty Glade Wrong Warp. As soon as this stage is over. At the start of this level, I killed both Clampons to manipulate the memory address at which the beetle coming up gets loaded. This beetle is the only one in the entire level and the only way to get an invisible object, so I have to take it and bring it with me. I also have to periodically release this beetle and regrab it, because if Diddy were to hold it for too long in his hands, it would wake up on its own and run away. I make my way to the trickiest part of this whole process, which is the pillar section. If I were to jump on an enemy while holding the beetle, it would immediately drop from Diddy's hands and die, so I have to juggle the beetle while taking care of the enemies at the same time. On top of that, I try some very precise jumps to skip some juggles and save some extra seconds, but these jumps can randomly not work at all, which adds to the difficulty. After clearing the pillar section, I reach a big cliff. It would seem impossible to clear this section with the beetle, but by performing a very precise throw, it's possible to both bring the beetle up the cliff and bounce on it at the same time. I then swap to Dixie, grab the beetle, and use a slope clash to get an invisible object, which I can then throw to make the bonus barrel trigger a wrong warp on entry. By the way, hugging the small left hill before the big cliff gave me consistent positional values, which allows the throw to always have a chance of working, otherwise it can randomly fail. But with that out of the way, I make my way over to Parachute Panic, which is one of the coolest levels in the entire run. The normal way of going through it consists of riding the purple parrots, which act as a sort of parachute that slowly guides the player throughout the downward sections. but by knowing the level layouts in advance, it's possible to completely skip all payload drives and just fall through the level. Gusty is used for the major part of it because of her hover ability, which allows for certain movements to be realistic for a human player. The section that I just got past is particularly dangerous, as getting hit there results in near guaranteed death. Towards the end of the level, I get hit on purpose to both use the invincibility frame to go through some enemies and to swap to Diddy and play as him. Webwood starts off with a short opening room which presents a few precise pieces of movement. This roll to get past the cutlets at the start is a bit complex and can even be a little bit dangerous if done wrong. At the end of the screen is probably the single most time-consuming mistake of my entire run. I tried to bounce on the top of this clubber but ended up bonking on it, costing a few seconds. In the next room I entered the Squitter barrel, which I'll be playing as for the rest of the level. This is one of the most dangerous sections in the entire run. To move around optimally, instant webs are used, which are done by pressing L and R at about the same time. If done during the ascent of a jump, this forms a platform under Squitter which can be immediately stood upon. If chaining together multiple instant webs though, there's usually a cooldown that prevents multiple webs from being formed in rapid succession, so that means I can't jump off too quickly from the first web in order to respect the cooldown. In addition, attempting to form a web too late during a jump will result in Squitter falling through it. This makes the timing for a bunch of these webs pretty precise, which often results in death if failed. Also, damage boosts off of enemies are fully intentional. After taking damage, there is a small period of time where a double jump can be performed, allowing for more distance to be covered off of a single jump. This double was personally one of my bigger run killers thanks to how punishing a single small mistake is here. Thankfully, the more I played this stage, the more consistent I got at it, so by the time I got this run, I wasn't killing nearly as many attempts as I was just a few months prior. This is the refight against Crow, and just like the first time, this entire fight is another instance of time-affecting RNG, although not quite as bad. After killing one of the real birds, a throwable barrel spawns either on the left, middle or right, which can make a little bit of difference, but the most important spawn is actually the second one, where a left spawn can lose as much as a few seconds. These rope climbs are pretty tricky as well, as I have to move in a pretty specific way to avoid getting hit by an egg and at the same time get through the ropes as fast as possible. The spawn ended up being pretty lucky, as the right spawn is the fastest one. I initially missed the last jump off this rope, which could have been really bad, but luckily the last stack that's normally there did not spawn, so I didn't wind up getting hit in the end. I swap to Dixie for the shorter fanfare and get started on War 6. This first level features the most recently found major trick in the run. I played the beginning as normal, taking a small shortcut over the clubber, but then I skipped Enguar's barrel thanks to a small gap beneath it. Enguar moves a lot faster through the water and even has a charge ability to go through large stretches of water in a flash, but I'm instead just aiming to go far enough into the stage to touch a water level trigger, and after doing that I turn back. The objective is to lure a lockjaw back to the start. Thanks to the character's swap animation not freezing enemies if done underwater, it will be possible to get hit by this lockjaw while swapping characters. Coincidentally, with clever positioning, the Kongs can momentarily be located inside a wall during this time. As such, I make my way back to a corner towards the beginning, then start swapping characters in a certain way. Upon hit, the remaining Kong will zip upwards, which conveniently puts Diddy right next to the end target. This glitch is possible anywhere in any water level, but the game unfortunately prevents the player from moving after the zip if the camera doesn't follow, making Arctic Abyss the only level thus far where this trick is useful because the target is right above the beginning area and fully loaded. Anyway, this next stage is windy. It's actually deceptively hard to optimize for a few reasons. First, every time the player lands on a platform from a wind ride, it's possible to perform what's called a fast fall, which is done by holding down briefly during the landing, which can save a few frames every time it's done properly. Then, a few wind areas can be jumped into from higher up, which also helps save a bit of time if done right. On top of that, there's a few major tricks that can help save additional time. The spot in the stage I just went through presents a launch barrel pointing right at a climb pond that is normally just damage boosted through. But with very precise movement, it's barely possible to sidestep the clampon and save the damage boost for later, which saves about half a second. I attempted the trick, but as you saw, I still ended up getting hit. The damage boost I just performed is relatively simple and skips a large section, and also conveniently puts Diddy back in front. I also missed a jump onto a hook soon after, which cost me a bit of time. Coming up is the most dangerous skip of the entire level. It's called Gate of B skip. By taking an off of a running start and jumping from a precise location, it's possible to go past 2 Bs in one go, saving a bit of time. This is a pretty punishing trick to fail because there are no more DK barrels in the rest of the level and I imperatively need 2 Kongs starting the next stage. I almost bumped into the first bee in this run but still managed to get through. The rest of the stage is pretty straightforward. Castle Crush is normally a 5 minutes auto-scroller and the longest level in the game. But we don't have time for that. Very conveniently, there's a DK barrel towards the start which can be used to get an invisible object pretty easily. This time though, it is instead used to throw a Cutlass, which enables a Cutlass warp similar to the one in Crockett Climber all the way back in Warp 3. To reach the barrel in time, I get help from a team throw, or else things could spawn in the incorrect memory locations and I can actually risk crashing the game. Lady takes damage, then Dixie jumps into the Rambi barrel at a precise time and I hold right on the D-pad while exiting it. This triggers a wrong warp and ends the stage immediately. Clapper's Cavern is one of the simpler levels in Warp 6. I grab the DK barrel at the start, then proceed to play as Dixie for now and use her hover ability. I skip the first Clapper, but activate all the other ones to enable me to roll through enemies and gain more speed. It's possible to skip this Clapper, but for a human player it usually ends up being slower. This is the first and only usage of Engard in the run, which is a little bit sad. He's pretty fun to control. I swap to Diddy underwater while I'm waiting for this bunny to turn around. Here I team up and throw Dixie to activate a hidden invincibility power-up. These lips are lying on the ground crying, but it's okay because I'm able to complete the stage slightly faster. After a somewhat difficult opening, Chainlink Chamber contains the last strong warp of the run. Similar to the warp in Bramble Scramble, which was in Warp 4, the success of this one is heavily determined by small movement differences, such as the exact trajectory of Diddy's fall from the top ledge. I climb this vertical chain for a bit, then I grab this cannonball and fall down from the lower floor to get an invisible object off the clubber. I carefully throw it, then grab the cannonball and enter the cannon that just spawned to finish the level. Toxic Tower is my personal favorite level in the run, but also one of the most difficult. The beginning is played as Rattly, where I chain multiple short-top double jumps, which are done by initiating a charge with the A button, then doing a very brief tap of the B button, which allows for a double jump. These are a good way of going through most platforms, but they can't reach as high as the true double jump that I used in World 1, which is used instead in a couple spots, like to reach this launch barrel early. That's actually a fairly difficult double jump, as not only is the initial input to enable the double jump a 3-frame window, but to actually reach the barrel it's necessary to squeeze out as much height as possible off the jumps, making the timing pretty precise. There's one last true double jump at the end to skip a B, then the squawk section starts. There's a lot of corner cutting involved in this part of the stage, making this a pretty tough section to optimize as well. I've tented a very difficult trick coming up called Red B Skip, which consists of barely squeezing under a red B with a precise set of positioning, speed, and angle, but unfortunately bonked onto the wall in the process, so just ended up taking a hit instead. If successful, I would have been able to save the damage boost for later, which would have been slightly faster. That act throw manipulates the camera to stay towards the right a little bit longer, which delays the spawn of the next B and allows for more optimal movement. Here is where I would have damage boosted if I still had a spare hit point. I accidentally bonked on this corner, which forced me to slow down a bit and wait for the B. The spider section is very simple and brief thanks to the use of instant webs. And with that, World 6 is over. The run is coming to a close as I'm entering the final world of the game in World 7. It only contains 2 levels, but the first one is particularly hard and dangerous. The opening section is played as Diddy only to save lag and animation frames, and there's a lot of very precise jumps that get very close to enemies and hazards. I've lost multiple runs that were on pace for a personal best time to this level coming up. Needless to say, it was judgment time for this run. This is Screech's Sprint. With the first half of the level done, I start the squawk section. Right off the bat, I skip the race against Screech by precisely flying above the race trigger. This is another one of those levels full of corner cuts, making it a pretty difficult optimization. This time, the corners have to be cut on brambles, which means that every mistake is punished with a hit first, then death. Coming up is B-Ring Skip, which avoids having to wait for the ring to fully rotate. I took a hit by accident here, which lost a bit of time and made the end of the stage pretty scary, but I managed to get through it without much of an issue from here. Normally hitting the target immediately triggers the long fanfare, but by never flying past a certain height throughout the entire stage, it plays the shorter animation on the goal instead. This is Captain Carol. The fight is known among speedrunners as essentially a glorified cutscene, as the only way to speed this up is by throwing the cannonballs into Carol's blunderbuss as quickly as possible. Other than that, the fight is pretty simple, and an easy ending to an otherwise very difficult run. There is a small instance of RNG here. Which of the two cannonballs loses its spikes and can be grabbed is random. It does not affect time in any way though. This fight is over 3 minutes long, making it by far the longest level in the entire run. In second place is Haunted Hall, which is just under 2 minutes long. Getting hit by the blue smoke here does not lose any time, as long as the interaction happens on the very right side of the screen. Getting hit by the smoke any sooner makes K. Rool wait a few more seconds before initiating his next attacks. This also applies to the next 2 cycles. Just holding Y and left here as Diddy prevents K. Rool from sucking him in. Dixie cannot do this in the same way. Time ends as soon as the cone is collected off the ground. This run clocks in as a 38-14. My number of run attempts read 5,941 out of this run. My sum of best segments, which is calculated by taking the best individual words across all my attempts, read 3759. While a 37 minutes run is theoretically possible, at the moment it would have to be a run so incredibly close to perfection that it would take an enormous amount of effort to achieve. But I'm optimistic it would happen one day, even if no new major discoveries will happen. Another interesting thing about this run is that it's the first to achieve a 33 minutes in-game time, which is shown on the file select screen. I will let the credits play out and show the in-game time on file selection at the end. Special thanks go to other DKC speedrunners for helping me out with my runs, and to all my viewers on my Twitch channel where I broadcast speedrun attempts to try and get runs like this one. That'll be it for me. Thanks for watching.